All right, today's video is going to be about this new project I picked up here, 04 YFZ with the Hurt engine. More specifically, I'm going to be focusing on the cylinder head and some things to look out for if you are doing maintenance, inspection, repair, purchasing a used one, etc. All right, clean the head up a little bit here so it's a little easier to see what we're dealing with. I'll start at the top, work my way to the bottom. Cam caps, one of the first things, and a big one to know about on these engines. Cam caps are line bored, as is most overhead valve engines. Aluminum have this type of cam setup, meaning that these cam caps are doweled in each corner. They go down and then they line bore them, so they're a married set. Try to take these off of another engine, another cylinder head, and put them on. They might be mismatched. The holes might not be in a good alignment and completely round. Could you get away with it? Maybe. It's not a game that I'm into playing. I like to only deal with cylinder heads with the original cam caps, which have the proper hole size and alignment, and that's that. I don't really negotiate on that. Now, the bolts holding them down, like a lot of the M6s on these heads, or M6s on these engines rather, they are 7.2 foot-pounds. You need to get a torque wrench that can go down. If you can do 7 or 7.5, you know, some of them only do a half foot-pound, that's fine too. But you don't want to over-torque these. I've heard stories of people where they over-tighten these things, and not only do they over-tighten them to the point where they stretch the bolts, you'll see it gets thin here, there's big gaps in between the threads, but it can actually distort this hole here and cause the cams to bind up. The engines don't turn properly or they crank slow. Oh, please avoid that. I can't imagine. So again, torque it. 1 drop of oil in the threads, 1 drop of oil under the bolt heads is all you need, and make sure those stay in good working order. Second thing is make sure that these surfaces are scar-free. In this case, there is one little scratch here on this. You can see some discoloration. I think that'll clean up, and the scratch, there's no material rolled over, which is good, and that will clean up okay. I'm pretty confident a little green Scotch-Brite and some WD-40 will go a long way to polish these surfaces up a little bit. This one on the front is not a friction surface. It simply captures that ball bearing. This retainer ring goes in here, and that basically fixes the thrust, so it locates the camshaft. And don't lose these, don't bend them, break them. And when it's going together, you can simply take this and put it down on top of the cam inside of its groove here, and it should be good to go. So obviously check your camshafts as well. In this case, that little scar I showed you corresponds to that. I can't really feel it, but you can see a little bit of discoloration. It cleaned up nice. The cams look beautiful. Bearings turn nice. You can check for the timing chains will dig in a little bit here, but you really want to avoid some major scarring. If you can feel sharp edges, the chain can bind up and start to maul those surfaces. So check for that too. Make sure all that stuff is nice and clean. Actually, on the topic of cams, these are pressed on. I think what they do is they probably heat this up, and they have a jig of sorts, probably locates via that hole and via these 2 holes here, and then they heat that up and put it on, and it's a shrink fit. Make a match mark. Some people, you see them tack weld on aftermarket cams that are aggressive. They can weld these or tack weld them. You can just make a little paint mark, and that way you'll know if that has slipped. Not very common, but it does happen. Same thing here. Make sure that these surfaces are good and smooth. Just not a lot of room to work with as far as damaging these and getting away with it. One thing you can do to check is put those in. If these surfaces have been damaged by oil starvation, then your lifter bucket will not pass up and down nicely. And watch me as I struggle. So that's how you can detect the wear there. Another thing is, it's interesting to follow the path the oil takes. Down in the corner here, this banjo feed bolt with the copper washers on it is where the oil feeds into the head, and it comes through that hole there. And then Yamaha has taken the liberty of making the caps via this cast-in feature here. The actual oil feeds through the head. So they cast in there. There's a ball plug in the ends. and then they drill in here, and there's a little recess, and there's a little recess in here, and then they drill through that hole, and it comes down into this, and then they use this little drilled intersect here to pass the oil into the other cam cap, and you can see where it picks it up right through there, into this cast-in, feeds it there. So that's how they distribute oil throughout the head. That being said, you want to make sure that all these surfaces here, all these surfaces are nice and flat and scar-free. If you have a head, either unfortunately you might have done yourself or somebody else might have tried to pry these caps off and marred these surfaces all up, what's going to happen is oil is going to leak out of here. It's going to take the path of least resistance. So if there's any reason this might be held up, so for example, if you drop this and ding the surface over, and we all know it doesn't really take much to ding some of these up, and then you go to tighten this down and there's a dent in the ends here, it can actually pick this up just enough where oil is leaking out of here, short-circuiting, and you don't know it. You know, there's no indication of that. But the oil will just flow out there and reduce the available pressure to the rest of the critical surfaces, mating surfaces in here. So we want to make sure all these surfaces are very, very flat. And if they need to be cleaned up a little bit of Scotch-Brite, green Scotch-Brite, and some WD-40 is nice to polish these surfaces. Or you can buy like a very fine stone file with some oil and just go over these very, very carefully. Make sure that there's no scars. Make sure these caps sit nice and flat. All these things are very critical, especially with these old parts. Things have been taken apart and rebuilt multiple times in the bike. You know, people have a tendency to, you know, these things will get stuck up a little bit and you want to pry them, and they can mark these surfaces up, drop things. You're going to want to make sure all your oil pressure goes to the critical parts it's supposed to. So same thing over here. This has got a nice surface on it, nice and smooth, very, very, I mean, very, very fine finish they cut into the aluminum for these cams. So take a look at that and make sure that these are nice and clean. If you have severely scarred, distorted cam journals, then that's a no-go. The head will be junk. So I will move along to this side here. A couple things on this side of the head. One, this is an 04 engine, so it's got a decompression mechanism hole that was bored here. They actually use these on the YZF dirt bikes, and this plug is not, this bolt with the washer is not used. But they put a rubber plug in here, and the rubber plug would blow out. You can buy a little anodized decompression plug, they call it, from various aftermarket sources, and plug this up. This one, you can see it goes all the way through into there. I don't know exactly what this mechanism was, but it was never used on these heads. The later ones were cast off here, and that bolt is not on there. So if you have a bolt in this hole, it's probably an 04 head. This is the original one off. This is an 04 bike I'm working on. So second thing on this side of the head is when Yamaha came and they machined these for the head bolts, you can see they left, it just was a straight end mill that comes down here, a straight cutter, and milled that parallel to this surface to the prescribed distance. However, they left a very sharp corner, and take a look at these corners, right where my thumb, at the tip of my thumb is, because they'll actually start to develop cracks. Being a 90-degree corner and very sharp edges here, all the stress will concentrate right in those corners. So you can actually take a tool and knock those down carefully and take that sharp edges off and put in a radius here, and it can reduce the stresses on these corners. You can see that one's got a little even a burr on it. So you can knock those down. If you're looking for a used head and it's got some cracks coming down here, it says needs weld repair, don't bother. You don't want to try welding that. To try to get these to the right, you know, make sure that these are good and flat and squared, and there's no distortion in the head from welding. Don't bother. So again, look for cracks here, and if you got an 04 head with this plug and this open hole, get a decompression plug. All right, onto the bottom. This one had a catastrophic failure in the engine. This valve is bent. It's pretty obvious to see if you look at it. That way you can see the valve is held open and the exhaust valve is bent. So that's unfortunate. And the piston came up and during the catastrophic failure had tapped the head here lightly. There's a little bit of a contact witness mark here and down here a little bit. This would clean up okay. I'd plan to have this head skim cut anyway. This surface has got to be mirror smooth. So again, another surface that you don't want gouges from people marking it up or dropping it on the floor or improper handling. Your head gasket will leak. So if you have combustion pressure leaking into here, or if you have coolant leaking on the outside of the engine from the head, it's going to be a bad day. So this surface has got to be nice and clean. You can put a straight edge on here and do the X pattern and slip between the straight edge and here and make sure that the feeler gauge does not slide under. They really don't want these things too distorted, or else you'll get leaks. This one's going to need to be rebuilt, so I'm just going over a few things here. Another, I guess you could call a weak point, although for typical use it's not. This is the hot side of the head. So obviously the air intake is over here, the carb is over here, 3 intake valves, your 2 exhaust. Your exhaust valves are having the exhaust gas go against them. They get very hot. When they hit the seats, they transfer the heat from the valve to the seat, into the head, into the antifreeze that's passing through here. I could say antifreeze, water, whatever people run. I use antifreeze in all my ATVs because they get stored in cold and used in all different weather conditions. Now this is the water will flow up through the cylinder, up through here, and then come out through this water pipe, which has an O-ring on it. I don't know if I went over that before, but it's got an O-ring that could, so if you're leaking water out of this pipe area and it's not coming from there, it could be coming from that O-ring most likely. Anyway, so the water flows up through here and out that way. Now you can see there's not a lot of room here for purposes of compact engine and making sure everything is as small and as light as possible. There's the exhaust port is right here, and you can see the exhaust port takes up some space, and there's not a lot of room for antifreeze there. So again, this is the hottest part of the head. This whole side, as your exhaust gas comes out and your heat, it needs to stay cool. If you run this engine hot, if you overheat it, if you run low in your water, this area is going to run really hot, and the aluminum will get so soft that it'll actually, you can torch cut. You'll look, and if you're looking for a used one, or if unfortunately you had it happen to you, this thing will get torch cut right through here, and this surface will be completely burned through. If that happened to the head, consider it junk. Don't even bother. Get rid of it, find another one. Don't try to repair it or anything. The aluminum is completely compromised. It's shot. So, but due to space constraints, that could be a potential issue. Now here is the copper gasket that goes in there. This is a new one. This will be usually covered in soot, but that butts up against your header pipe and seals it. So I like the Yamaha ones. Now, if you have a ported head and this is opened up, you can get a Suzuki LTR. It's pretty much the identical gasket, but the inside diameter is larger and it won't block off your port. So if you have port work and this ring actually kind of creates a step here, you can get the Suzuki LTR one. Widely available, cheap, and it's identical in every way except for that inside diameter. So that's a neat little thing if you have a ported head. Now I'm going to go on to valve life. So I didn't go into valve lash checks too much, but obviously as the valve condition and the seat condition degrades, the valve is actually going to move itself upwards in the upwards direction and start picking this cam bucket up and lifting it towards the camshaft and closing up that distance. So that's why your valve lash is kind of a good important maintenance item on these, and you want to make sure that you maintain a good clearance in there, or else the engine will be hard to start and it'll start reducing the life of the valves. If it gets to the point where it holds the valve open, then you're obviously going to drop performance and you're going to start having the seats and the valves erode pretty quickly. Another big one is the air filter maintenance is huge on any vehicle, any engine, honestly, but especially on dirt bikes and ATVs where you're constantly in dusty environments, and you do not want that dust and dirt constantly passing through the engine. It's going to go across the valve face and erode that. The valve is going to close on the dirt, and it's going to start to cause pitting, and it's just going to lead to a very shortened valve life and seat life on engines. So unfortunately, in the event of this one, here's what I found. When I opened up the air box, because this was kind of all loose and apart, I found the filter. Somebody put this nice Pro Design on here, where it's got that aluminum ring that goes into the airbox. This is exactly what I'd be putting in if I was building this right now. I anticipated this would be a stock airbox. It's not. But they put in the foam filter, and the foam filter has no oil on it. So you can see, look at that. It's been dirt has been passing through there, and you can see it right in there too. Dirt has been passing through, and it's on the inside of that adapter, meaning that this thing has been eating dirt. And you can even see on a little bit on the inside of the carburetor, and there on the top, it's been eating dirt. And that dirt is going to shorten the life of these parts dramatically. So that's a few things I wanted to go over today. Got a lot more work ahead of me on this one. Actually, I didn't really talk about the decompression.